that you wanna leave behind, but you face them all alone, cause you feel you're on your own, pretending you're okay, but really not okay. I know you are afraid of how people will think about you, so shine on your inner light, let them all know what you're going through. Then a secret anymore. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, here's what you have to do. You gotta speak up, speak up. Conversation change lives. You gotta speak up. If you wanna save lives, you gotta speak up, speak up. Conversation change lives. They say mental health is craziness. They believe it's laziness, but I don't feel the same. They think it's a game. I've been there on the ground. Dark is all I found. But then I came back. I put it in the track. I'm not here for the fame, but you gotta know my name. Spreading positivity instead of negativity. Tell me how you feel. This is something real, fighting stigma in the society, bipolar and anxiety, depression and addiction, killing people, not a fiction, yeah. We gotta work out for this. Spread the love with the kiss. So if you feel you're a champion, shine your light, let it glow to the world. Shine your light, let it glow to the world. Shine on your inner light, let them all know what you're going through. Then a secret anymore. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, here's what you have to do. You gotta speak up, speak up. Conversation change lives. You gotta speak up, speak up. If you wanna save lives, you gotta speak up, speak up. Conversation.
Thank you very much indeed for that wonderful performance. And we are delighted that you could all join us for this important session, which we are going to have introduced to us now by Erla Magnusdottir. Erla is a very old friend of mine. We go back quite a long way, probably older than we would like to think. And she was the basic needs representative in China for a number of years, and then is now CBM Basic Needs Coordinator. I am Chris Underhill, and I am the one of the co-chairs of the Mental Health Collaboration for Catalyst now, and you are most welcome to this session. My job is to now hand you over to Erla and to invite her to start the session off for us. Thank you very much, Erla. Over to you.
Thank you, Chris, for your introduction. And hello, everyone. Great to see both new and familiar faces here today. It's an honor to introduce today's speakers, Sue Baker and Rosemary Gathara. I do think we have one tiny problem that I don't think Rosemary is with us yet, but hopefully...
I've just called her, Claire, and I think that the time zone she got a bit wrong, but she's pulling over. She's out in the field, but she's pulling over so that she can dial in a second now.
Excellent. We will improvise. But great that she will be joining us shortly. But it's a real privilege for me to get to introduce the speakers today, because I've had the privilege to work with them closely in recent years on anti-stigma initiatives. I've learned a lot from both of them, and I hope you will too, although I know that the time we have today is quite short. So let me formally introduce Sue and Rosemary. So Sue Baker has worked to destigmatize mental health for almost 30 years in the UK, New Zealand, and globally. She set up the Time to Change campaign in England in 2007 that led to a sea change in public attitudes and reductions in discrimination. She then founded Time to Change Global in 2018, working with partners and people with lived experience in Africa and India to tackle mental health stigma across a range of cultures and contexts. She co-founded the Global Anti-Stigma Alliance 12 years ago and is a co-chair of the Global Mental Health Action Network Stigma and Discrimination Working Group. Sue now advises international bodies, governments, NGOs, funders, and networks of people with lived experience on social change programs aimed at improving public attitudes, reducing discrimination, and empowering people with lived experience to lead change. She runs an independent consultancy called Changing Minds Globally and is currently working on stigma projects in Kenya, the Caribbean, Lithuania, and across Europe. Sue was one of the sub-authors of the Lancet Commission on Ending Stigma and Discrimination in Mental Health and part of the team who worked on the WHO Mosaic Global Stigma Toolkit launched last year. Sue was awarded an OBE for services to mental health in 2016. I will now introduce Rosemary Gathara. Rosemary is a health and development professional. She is experienced in developing and managing interventions for community health delivery, especially for mental health and epilepsy. She managed the National Epilepsy Association in Kenya for 9 years and now leads Basic Needs, Basic Rights Kenya, a leading mental health NGO. Basic Needs Kenya programs work especially with adolescents and youth, conducting resilience, mental health, and anti-stigma campaigns, working in learning institutions, workplaces, and in the communities of urban towns and rural areas, as well as training caregivers and health workers in community management for people with mental health conditions to live and work in their communities. Rosemary is a nutritionist by training. So I'm going to just pop in the chat a few documents that you may find useful. We won't have a lot of time today to go into a lot of detail of the great work that Sue and Rosemary have done. However, we think it's important to set the context a little bit, and I want to invite them both just to introduce their own work in their own words. So I'm going to start with you, Sue, since I'm not sure we know if Rosemary is here yet. So if you could just introduce a little bit your work, although I know we could talk for days, but just a brief introduction. So over to you.
Yeah, and what an honour it is to be invited to spend some time with you all. So thank you for dialing in. I mean, we all continue to learn from each other, don't we? I've learned a lot from you. I've learned a lot from brief interventions with Chris as well. You know, no one has all the answers when it comes to social change around mental health and stigma. I probably won't say too much more because I think we've got quite a lot to cover. I know we're working for Rosemary, but you did a very kind, thorough introduction. Thank you. But no one has defeated stigma. We've made major inroads in many areas, many contexts, but you know that relies on many different things. But just the only line I would say as part to add to that introduction is often what you'll see is advocacy for and action on mental health, which has a focus on service transformation, as it should do, from institutional to rights-based community-focused provision, and on changes to policy and legal frameworks, as there should be changes. But what's often left out is that big umbrella under which all mental health happens and society is influenced, which is stigma and discrimination. So if communities aren't supportive, if professionals are prejudiced and discriminatory, if employers are, if education systems are, and if your family and friends are, you're literally limiting mental health transformation to the services that people may or may not, or may have long waiting times for. So you're providing a service for people coming in and out and in and out and in and out. But can those people maintain the lives that they should and must, you know, be able to live without human rights abuses and barriers that discrimination put in our way to loving relationships to parenting, to jobs, to education, to training, to being community leaders, often stigma is right at the bottom of an already neglected pile, which is mental health. So I guess my life's work, and I'm not going to give up ever, is to make sure that there is work done around stigma and discrimination. And the Lancet was great, just while we wait for Rosemary to join, because it identified 4 types of mental health stigma. So external stigma from the public, from family and friends, from the media, structural stigma in policies and laws and the practice of key professional groups, self-stigma where we internalize it, and then associated stigma where it attaches itself to your family and to people working in the sector. That's a very brief analogy. So lots of different types of stigma and discrimination, but lots of evidence about the interventions that work across all of our global contexts and cultures. So this has to be locally designed and led, but there are some tools and methods and approaches that have had real solid evidence around them. So I'm hoping we can share a bit of that today.
Thank you so much, Sue. I wonder if you would just give us, because we're going to share a few videos with the audience, and I wonder if you could just give us a little bit of an introduction of the videos that we will see.
Yeah, is everybody ready? Should we start with that while we wait for Rosemary to join?
I think that we'll do that, and hopefully Rosemary will have joined by then.
Okay, so it's a bit of a show and tell, so you don't have to listen to Rosemary and I for the whole hour. But we ran Time to Change in England for 15 years, and we had significant targets of attitude and behaviour change and reductions in discrimination, and all the time about developing a social movement of those of us with lived experience. I'm someone who've had 3 breakdowns myself. So the first one, we took our audience, our public audience, we segmented and researched different audiences. So you'll hear me talk about when we focused on men who thought they had no connection to mental health, and they were a very hard audience for us to reach until we designed and tailored something specifically for them. We had a young people's programme, including a social marketing campaign, and work with half of all the secondary age schools, so that's sort of 11 to 16 years, taking a whole school approach. And lots of other targeted work focused on African and Caribbean communities who are overrepresented in nearly every aspect of mental health provision and social justice here in, criminal justice here in the UK. So I'm going to start with some of the early themes. So the campaign moved over time as we moved our audiences on and as we changed audiences. So the first thing we found was that most of the population here in England knew that there was discrimination based on other factors like gender, or gender identity, should I say, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, age, disability, but they didn't know that those of us with mental health problems also face stigma and discrimination. So nobody knew it was an issue, nobody cared about it, nobody was aware it was a problem. So we had to do a lot of early work, and we carried on always designing campaigns based on where our audiences were at, what they understood, or should we more accurately say what they misunderstood about mental health, the prevailing myths and facts, always assessing their levels of knowledge and attitudes, and then what might work. So, they would give us the clues about what might build understanding and empathy and what kind of messaging might work. So we always are driven by insight research with our audiences. But the first video I was going to play, Rosemary's with us, brilliant. Do you want to quickly introduce Rosemary, or do you want to?
No problem. Just
okay.
Go on. Let's let Rosemary get settled, and we will then introduce her. Thank you.
So we found out that there was no talking about mental health. It was a very sort of British thing, really, to brush it under the carpet, stiff upper lip. No, but what we found was that most of the population was subconsciously stigmatizing. So they didn't know what to say or do. So they said hurtful and harmful things. Or they were conscious discriminators, which meant they knew that what they were saying and doing was not helpful and it was hurting people. But again, they didn't know how to talk about mental health and how to support people. So we did quite the first sort of 3 or 4 years was this big theme, and this carried on about getting people to talk openly and, you know, giving tools for people to be able to have those conversations and be more supportive friends and families and colleagues. So there's a whole wealth of materials that we did. So this is just one of the, this is a film that we did. It wasn't one of the ads that ran on TV or social media, but we knew that we needed to empower both those of us with lived experience to talk. We trained at 7,000 champions, people with lived experience, and 300 young people. But we also needed to give the tools about how to talk about mental health to our communities that we needed to reach with our campaign. So the first one is just a little animated video. It shows some of our trained champions saying, here are tips how to talk about mental health, because nobody knew how to. So Susan, if we can try and play that first one.
You don't need to be an expert to talk about mental health. Just a few small words, asking someone how they're feeling can make a big difference and can start them talking if they weren't feeling able to. Some people might want to talk and other people might not, but they will certainly appreciate the fact that you actually cared enough to ask them in the first place.
Using words like chin up or it'll pass really won't help. Just being non-judgmental and open-minded, letting someone talk is what we really need. Not everybody's going to have the answer, but just talking about it and having somebody to listen really helps.
If you're feeling awkward about starting a conversation, finding out more about mental illness might be a really big help. Educating yourself, learning more about what the person is going through. It might be a way to start the conversation with a little bit more knowledge, and they'll really appreciate that you took the time to learn more about them.
Little things can make a big difference, even just sending a text message to somebody. Sometimes people aren't always there to be talking face to face and they might not be ready for it. So sometimes just a simple text might be enough. They may not get back to you straight away, but at least they know you care.
Don't forget, don't just talk about mental health. That isn't the only part of a person. Talk about EastEnders, talk about what you did last night, talk about all the things you normally do. Be as normal as you can. We don't just want you to focus on the mental health issue.
Okay, so that was getting people to not be afraid to talk about mental health, and we played on that with lots of sort of humour and, you know, you're afraid of this, should you really be afraid of talking about mental health? But we had to give people tools to do that, which is what that film was about. Susan, I'm going to suggest we skip the next one, which was a link on YouTube anyway, and we go to video 3, which is the In Your Corner advert. So this was probably 8-9 years into Time to Change. We knew from analysis of the National Public Attitude Survey which audiences were moving the most and which ones we might need to do more targeted work with. So we decided, after a year of analysis of the research and piloting and testing, and sitting down with men and young men and various different groups, that we would go for an audience that most people don't target, with great need here, with what we called the cold as in the opposite of hot, male audience. So men that thought mental health was absolutely irrelevant to their lives. So they didn't know anybody, it didn't affect them, it was never going to affect them. So we had to work really hard to engage an audience and not to ask the men, the cold men, to talk about mental health. So this was about 9 years into the 15-year campaign. So this is called In Your Corner, and it's more about being there for a mate or a friend. It's very anglicised and very blokey, so it's because this is what was going to work with those men. in lower income employment sectors as well, is what we decided to go for. And the one that we'll play after that is a partnership we did with Ford Cars, with their trucks that are used by a lot of men in this audience. And they took this ad and repurposed it and paid for about £500,000 worth of advertising. So if we play these back to back, you'll see how it was taken on by a big employer that was pledged to Time to Change as an employer, and how they sort of owned the campaign with us then. Thank you, Susan.
Whoa. Can I help you?
With John's mates. Is he around?
Yeah. He's over there.
Cheers, mate.
Right, John. All right, boys. What's it there?
1 in 4 of us will fight mental health problems this year.
You can do this, John. We're with you.
Having a mate in your corner can make all the difference. So if your mate's acting differently, step in.
Here we go now, the bell's out.
Search Time to Change.
This was one of our most successful ads, but we had the call to action was step in for a friend, a mate, sort of blokey language here in England. And it had the best behaviour change, with something like 75 or 80% of the audience that had been targeted, that were campaign aware, saying that they had stepped in, which is unparalleled with any campaign we'd done or in our sector. So the next one was, we were talking to Ford. They're a big employer. Their audience was the same as our male audience, and they decided to partner with us, sign up as an employer, and run this ad, which is called The Elephant in the Van. So it's sort of, do you hear about the elephant in the room? Like the thing no one talks about, and it's sat there. That's kind of a phrase here. So this elephant, the elephant, which is like the taboo, is in this transit van. And let's see if this plays out okay. Thanks, Susan. Oh, this is a different one, sorry. I think that was
1 in 10 young people will experience a mental health problem.
Let's play this one. This is the youth
acting differently.
version of In Your Corner.
Twinkle,
Right.
twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky.
So we can share these with you. So basically that was then testing with 12 to 14-year-olds. This was when Skype was a thing. So don't forget, this is like way, way back when social media was kind of emerging, really. And that's how does a young boy show his support for another young boy that's struggling? So we did lots of testing with young men and young women as well. But this is what worked with young men, that like being a good friend mattered to the men, and it mattered to the young boys and girls as well. So there were various different iterations of that, and that's just saying, you know, be there for a friend. So you can see we're not asking people to find the words to talk about mental health, especially not men. Doesn't mean that some men hadn't changed, many men actually, with our other adverts, but this was targeted at those that hadn't been reached before. So if we can play the Ford one, I think that's a YouTube link, Susan, to the Ford Elephant in the Van. Don't worry if we haven't got time. Sounds like, should we probably better move on, I think.
Maybe just move on, but we'll make sure to include them in the notes so that people can see them as well.
But it just shows you how we were getting big support from very big employers and corporates. We had 3,000 employers that pledged to Time to Change across every single sector you could imagine. There's a big movement happening by now, addressing stigma in partnership with us across communities and sectors. So this ad, is asked twice. A guy got stuck under the tree. So this is video number 6. So this was one of our last ever adverts, aimed at men again, but taking it, the call to action was to ask twice, because quite often in many cultures, you ask someone how they are and they go, yeah, I'm fine, I'm okay. But you only get the honest answer when you ask twice. And it's a simple behavioural call to action. This had even better results than the male advert. So we might get a chance to play that. Thank you, Susan.
You all right, mate?
Yeah, I'm fine. Sometimes people say they're fine when they're not. But with 1 in 4 experiencing a mental health problem, to really find out, ask twice.
You sure you're all right?
Actually, I could do with some help.
Well, let's talk about it.
Yeah, do you mind?
So, and that had amazing results. It's a simple thing to ask people to do. And so I'm just going to play the final one, which is then, this is when we started Time to Change Global with some incredible partners and with IRCLA and CBM and Rosemary from BNBR and colleagues in Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya, Ghana and rural southern India near Bangalore. So this was one of the ads. It took the core methods of Time to Change and adapted by local partners, trained local people with mental health problems as champions. And this was one of the ads from the Ghana campaign, which was similar to the call to action in the, sorry, this is the Nigeria campaign, to the Ghana one, which is "It could be you," which, you know, 1 in 5 people have it, it could be you. So we might just get a chance to play that and then that's it. Again, based on many, many focus groups in each location. So this was in Abuja with different segments of the population. And we were very lucky to have a great partner in the Gede Foundation. But that's it from me. Thank you. Thank you for sharing.
So much, Sue, for that introduction and really inspiring videos, and quite amazing when thinking that some of them were produced now quite a long time ago. So the next section of our webinar, we're going to do, well, I'm going to lead a few questions to Sue and Rosemary, who we have with us now, which is really nice. You will then have an opportunity to ask questions. Please do pop in the questions as they come up, you know, now, so that we have them ready to go, once we're done with this. So Rosemary, welcome. Wonderful to have you with us.
Yes, thank you, IRCLA. Really lovely to be here. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to the audience. Thank you.
So we've already done an introduction, a formal introduction of you, but I want to ask you a little bit about your journey of becoming CEO of BNBR. And if you could tell us a little bit also about the journey of growth that BNBR is on. You know, I know today the focus is particularly on stigma, but I know your work, you know, is broader than that. So if you could share with us a little bit, both about yourself, your own journey, but also BNBR's.
Okay. Thank you, Atlas. So I could talk of 2 journeys. There's my personal journey, but let me start with a professional journey. So I've been in health and development for over 20 years. I started off in 2001. My first formal employment was in the development sector. And then we were working on malaria and HIV and other such communicable conditions. And we had this term that I have longed to hear in the mental health sector. And we kept talking about the burn rate. There was funds and a lot of pressure to get the funds out the door. Of course, there was focus on impact, but there was a lot of funding then for malaria, HIV, but not at all so for mental health. So I had my friend, Ruth had a brother, Wale had epilepsy. Unfortunately, he died from burns from seizures, and I got personally interested. And the National Epilepsy Association, that's about 2010, they were recruiting. They were about to shut down. They were looking for funding. So anyway, I got interested. On this side, we had meetings about why you hadn't spent, and on that side, they were struggling with funding. So I transitioned to the National Epilepsy Association. But after that, I realized that the seizures were only a very small problem for people with epilepsy. it was the mental health issues, you know, they had to deal with all this stigma, they had to deal with all this challenges with their self-esteem, how people saw them after they saw them having a seizure. And so I was there for about 9 years, and then we did some partnership with Basic Needs during that time. Since 2011, 2013, we had some partnership with Basic Needs, and we tried to incorporate some mental health work. But then when the opportunity opened up at Basic Needs, Basic Needs became a local organization, and they were recruiting a local CEO. I definitely jumped at the opportunity because Basic Needs was working both in mental health and on epilepsy. And I do have a personal lived experience. So I've had various challenges to my own mental health. And it was good to be both, to understand better mental health, but also to offer support to others. So it's been really a cherished opportunity to be in this space of mental health and to be at Basic Needs. So Basic Needs has, of course, been on a journey. There was a lot of focus, I think, early on supporting people who had mental health problems to live and work in their communities. And it did involve, even then, tackling stigma. However, there was also a lot of effort to get people have access to care, because then there was very little when it comes to health services offering mental health services. But increasingly that has changed. So there are more facilities now offering mental health conditions. It is more recognized both in our policies and in our new mental health law. So the focus now is really on the attitudes, because it's one thing for somebody to have treatment for their mental illness, but it's another for them to be accepted, to be productive in their community, and to not be seen as, I mean, the mental health challenge doesn't make them a lesser person. So that recognition that to have a mental health condition does not diminish somebody. So yeah, I'm glad that we are able to do some work on the stigma side of things. That's been a lot.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rosemary. Thank you for sharing both about your personal journey, but also about BNBR. You know, for me, just sort of seeing, it's been really obvious that, you know, BNBR, your organization, is going from strength to strength. It's been exciting to follow the progress. So Basic Needs, Basic Rights Kenya, or abbreviated BNBR, was part of the Time to Change global program, which was inspired by Time to Change England, which Sue was sharing some videos from earlier and talking about. The local name of your campaign is called Speak Up, but you will see in some of the links that I shared above, like the Mosaic WHO anti-stigma toolkit. So it's one of the case studies that is showcased in that toolkit. So, you know, lots of exciting things happening, and it's been great to witness that. Sue, if I turn to you now and ask you, you have dedicated your career to anti-stigma work. If you can tell us a little bit about what inspired you to work, not just on mental health, but specifically stigma.
Oh, right, I'll keep this, keep this brief. Well, even when I was much younger, at college, one of my best friends had very severe episodes of depression, and I could see the way other people judged her and excluded her. And so I was 16 at the time, and I was like, this isn't right. She was my best friend. One of my best friends at university developed bipolar. My first partner had schizoaffective disorder, as it was called then, and bipolar, manic depression, as it was called then. So I had a lot of close connection to mental health, and every single person, including when my dad got depressed, was badly treated, was excluded, was discriminated against. People wouldn't want to be their friends. People didn't want to work with them. My dad lost his job. So from a young age, I was like, there is something horribly wrong with this grave social injustice. And I just was so angry. I was like, this is not right. Or just because something's going on up there in your mind, why is that different to something going on in your body? So I guess I kind of got engaged that way. And no one was talking about mental health, and it was all negative, and it was about the failure of care in the community and throwing people back in the asylum. And, you know, we were all dangerous psychos with knives. I mean, unfortunately, those myths and those misunderstandings are prevalent across most contexts because there's nothing to replace it. There haven't been campaigns to educate the public. It hasn't been a topic at school. It hasn't been a focus in workplaces. So they just prevail through generation to, and obviously, you know, some value-based there and some faith-based issues around, you know, understanding of mental health. So lots of different things drive it, and policies and laws. And I studied advertising and marketing, and I sat there thinking, I don't want to sell fast cars, chocolate bars, or soap bars. I want to do something about, I didn't even know, we didn't even talk about stigma, but I was like, this is not right. I want to do, lo and behold, I wanted to work for Mind, which is the charity you see that worked on and off for. It's the UK's biggest mental health NGO and the biggest provider of community-based voluntary sector services, mental health services. We were very strong advocates for human rights right from the outset, people's rights to a multitude of things. So I joined in the mid-90s. It was my dream come true. I headed up the media relations department, but worked with the policy director. And I thought, I keep hearing stories of people, like a lady came out of a psychiatric institution as an inpatient and somebody threw a brick through her window. One of her neighbours, she'd just come out of hospital and she had a brick through her window. And I thought, how awful is that? And I knew that this was the untold story of mental health. And that if we wanted to do something about this thing that's now called stigma, we need to hear those stories, even if just for a day. So I did a big bit of survey, and that was the start of it, really. And I had the honour of being asked to go and apply for a job in New Zealand. And Noku Te Ao is the longest running mental health anti-discrimination, anti-stigma program in the world. So we're only here, and I'm only here from learning from New Zealand brothers and sisters. 27 or 30 years they've been going, and they had evidence of attitude change and then behaviour change. And See Me in Scotland was running several years before we applied for funding, finally, to do something in England. So globally, we share similar problems. The approaches need to be local, very specific to each local community and audience. But unfortunately, stigma is still a very big entrenched problem globally. And I've had 3 breakdowns since, so that's another driver probably. But yeah, it's been a...
Thank you, Sue. If I just ask you now to reflect on, sometimes when we're in the midst of things, we forget to celebrate the successes because the kind of hill can seem steep ahead of us. If you just reflect on a moment that you felt proud of, that you think, maybe things are going in the right direction.
Rosemary, do you want to?
Either one of you to start.
Okay, sure. I think for me, it's the stories I hear daily in the community. We have a huge team of champions, over 60 that we've trained, and so far about 20 or so are still actively engaged in the anti-stigma work. And to hear their story, that they can come out and say they have a mental health condition, but that's not all they're about, that their community can see them as more than that. When they share their story and they share their mother, their wife, and they're doing so much in their community, they're farming or they're working different jobs, a teacher, but they can still talk about their mental health condition and challenge the stigma around them. For me, hearing those stories all the time and seeing these champions, I feel we are getting somewhere. And especially when they speak even in national events. We had an event where the Director General of Mental Health was sharing a platform with a mental health champion and acknowledged the courage it took to share their experience, but also the power of that sharing in challenging stigma. So I felt that's quite a win.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. And over to you, Sue.
I think it's something, it always blows me away when you see the bravery, and I hate saying that word because it shouldn't be brave, but it is, especially when you're some of the first people in a community to speak up, to coin a phrase. And I've been working in the Caribbean recently, And, you know, very small communities, small island developing states often, and the Falkland Islands, and like 4,000 or 5,000 people. And the strange thing is that everybody knows your business. Like there's no privacy, is there? I mean, it's in small communities. Once people know something about you, you can't take it out. But they don't know about anybody's mental health because nobody talks about it. So there's this parallel of these small closed communities, and that extends to towns, small villages, anywhere in the world, where you're living cheek by cheek with each other, but nobody knows anything about or how to support your mental health, or to open up the conversation, or, you know, just be more supportive in general, because no one is talking, even though they know probably everything else about the neighbours. So that we've been working with local partners and training the first people in very small communities to speak about their lived experience. And yeah, I mean, everywhere I go, I think, oh gosh, are people going to come forwards? And everywhere I've worked, every country, people do. And it's inspiring, like you say, Rosemary, it's humbling. It gives me goosebumps every time. And you think, wow, yes, we've got 2 people or 4 people, and then there are 20 people. And then that encourages more people, and more people come, as you say, Rosemary, who are business leaders, politicians, sports people, everyday people like us, you know, that it's just one part of our identities. And it shouldn't hold us back, but sadly it does. So yeah, I think that's always, every single time we go and train with local partners, people lived experience, you're always like, you know, it's amazing, but sadly needed still nearly everywhere.
Thank you so much to both of you. I'm conscious of time, and I'm realizing we have more questions than we probably have time for, and I want to open it to sort of the floor. I see we have a few questions coming in, but let me just ask you one question on media. I know for both of your work, media, public figures have played an important role, social media. So I want to just first start with Rosemary, if you can tell us a little bit about your work with media in Kenya.
Yes, in addition to the conversations that mental health champions have in the community, where they disclose a mental condition, we also posted clips of the champions on social media. It increases the reach, and yeah, we have a lot more interactions. People can comment, and we can have a good conversation, a positive conversation about mental health on social media. But I especially like the partnership we had with the Media Council of Kenya. And Sue had a brilliant idea where we sponsored a category. Every year, the Media Council of Kenya runs the annual Journalist Excellence Awards. And we sponsored a category of mental health. It was so good to see the people trying to write stories about mental health that are not the usual, where people you know, those kinds of images and the negative spin on things. But we had quite a few entries that were positive. And what the best thing that came out of it is to have some guidelines when you're writing. You know, the media people say they're trained to write details, the when, the how, the where, the who, the what. So like when they're covering suicide and we say, no, don't write about the method, don't try, I mean, be sensitive about it, and to have that conversation with them and to agree you can ethically report even on such sensitive things as suicide without mentioning the method. Don't quote a suicide note. And they had best practice guidelines. So we're very fortunate to have benefited from what Time to Change had done, and to borrow from some of, to borrow some of these things to work with our Media Council of Kenya for better journalism around mental health.
Thank you, Rosemary. And I know you had a lot of impact in terms of increase of positive mental health stories. And one of the links that I shared above is a report that you did kind of studying the discourse in media around mental health. So really good work there. Sue, over to you.
Yeah, I'm conscious of time and I'm a bit of a blabber. So the media were a key partner in driving change here in England, and we saw statistically significant improvements, a sea change in public attitudes, but more importantly, reductions through academic evaluation in levels of discrimination. So that's partly the evidence base that holds it up, but we saw very significant improvements in media reporting. So as I said earlier, you know, the prevailing myth and stereotype that you'd see in the national soaps, across the newspaper, you'd see it across social media. This is before social media was, we were a danger to others. Nothing about us working, living, loving, contributing to society. And so we had to work with the media, because we found out with our audiences that many people take their understanding of mental health and a big influence on them is how the media were reporting mental health. So we had to have the media as a target. So we had an ex-BBC producer. We set up a dedicated project. We worked with 80 scripts and soaps a year, from radio to all the major TV shows. We even had some of the media signing up as pledged employers, because the mental health and well-being of producers, reporters, especially when they're going to traumatic events, you know, there's quite a big move to look after mental health and well-being of media professionals. Rosemary, we did some of that in Kenya, didn't we, with the Media Council of Kenya? But so it was important to provide reporting tools, awards to recognise good practice for broadcast media, social media, print media. People with lived experience as advocates was another category. So that was really important. But social media is obviously incredibly important these days, as well as mainstream traditional media. And I think we were going to have a question which I could quickly answer. Are they a force for good or bad? They're both. You know, they need proper moderating. There's horrific content that is responsible for all kinds of awful things, so we need more safety and more safeguards around that. But that doesn't mean you should not ignore social media as a positive force for good if you control the content and you're sort of countering some of that negative stuff with the anti-stigma or empowerment messaging and stories from, you know, people with lived experience from your communities. That will help massively. So don't discount them. And it's relatively cheap if you've got good creative that's been informed by local audiences. As I keep saying, they're the people that need to design your campaigns, not us too close to it. But you can get huge reach and coverage at very little cost if you advertise on social media. And that's what we did in Kenya and Ghana and Nigeria and Uganda and in England. So good and bad. We've got to deal with the bad, but use it as a force for good.
Thank you so much to both of you. And having worked a lot with you, one thing that I really took away is the importance of the training. So if you're working with champions, people with lived experience, making sure that people are conscious, you know, what do they want to share? Are they comfortable with it? And that they have control of their own narrative. So that's, yeah, also ties in with safety of social media and sharing lived experience stories. We have 10 minutes left, so let me pass over to Chris, who was going to lead the Q&A session. I think we have at least a few questions.
Sure, absolutely. If people have a question, either put your hand up in the Zoom system, or get up and dance like this, and I'll see you. But meanwhile, just very quickly to point out that there's a very rich set of notes in the chat. We have a wonderful participant audience today, and they have been putting in an enormous amount of stuff in the chat, so which I think would be wonderful for you to just be able to browse after the session is finished, and you too, Rosemary. And so, for example, we have our friend Samuel from the Catalyst Now Rwanda chapter. He's our chair in that chapter there. And he has put forward a very interesting proposal there, which I think would be interesting for you, Sue. And we have a number of other people who have put in important, and there are quite a big chunk of links from Susan, our mental health collaboration coordinator. And thank you, Jacob, for your constant notes, which are really helpful and appreciated. And so it goes on. There's a really important, Elana has also written a little bit. And then we have Feline from Salvador, who's written a very nice piece, which is very important to share. Sue has put her email address in there. Generous of you, Sue, thank you. And we promise we won't all write immediately we finish this webinar, but it's obvious that you would like people to approach you in due course. There has been a request. I can see the wonderful Gary Belkin, who is working on mental health and climate change, who is with us today. Thank you for being with us, Gary. And so we have, a tremendous group of people here, all coming to talk about and to see this important work that you're doing, Rosemary, in Kenya, and you, Sue. And the other thing that I think we also should note is that we want to note the leadership of both Rosemary and Sue. This is part of the whole point of this webinar, which is that we understand that here we have real leaders giving important support and help. And what is lovely about this particular seminar and webinar, I have the screen in front of me with all the names, is that a lot of the other people in this webinar are also your peers, Rosemary and Sue. These are people who are tremendously important in the global mental health space. So that is much appreciated, including the all-important fact of people with lived experience. So it would be lovely to hear from one or two people if they would like to come on board and make a comment this time. This is the time to make a fool of yourself and do a bit of dancing and attract my attention, or just simply put up your hand in the usual way. That would be good. Hi, Sue. Hi, Phil. I'm good that you have opened up your videos. That's great that we can see you there.
There's a couple of questions.
Can I do a little dance and ask a question that I put in the chat?
I see Sumati coming, Sue. You definitely made a sufficient fool of yourself. That's great. Yeah, come in. Yeah.
Well, anytime I can make a fool of myself, always ready to. Well, first off, thank you so much, Sue and Rosemary, for this fantastic work. The work and sharing it. It's so great. It's something that, I've always felt like as we think about, the social determinants of change and looking at like the socio-ecological model, as well as thinking about the journey to change, we're oftentimes thinking about providing services, which is super, super important. I am a therapist myself, but I think that one of the things that often gets missed is if we're not creating the awareness and the demand for it, which is, sort of sits on this, the important need for getting rid of the stigma so people will actually accept those services and seek those services, then we're kind of not getting anywhere. So I love that you guys are starting right at the beginning, and it's work that I'm really interested in. So you've talked a lot about the work that you have done so far, which has been incredible. So curious to hear more about how that work is continuing. Are you seeing that there are other partners that are really interested in continuing this work? I just think it's wonderful and needs to continue. So just curious how that's all coming about.
Thank you, Sue. So what about the future is the question really, in the future of this particular field, of this particular subject in the whole question of stigma and mental health. Sue, did you want to jump in very quickly?
Yeah, but I think it would be really, thank you, Sue, for that. There's a lot of Sues here, aren't there?
Yeah.
I think you have to be called Sue to do this. But Rosemary, it'd be great to hear about the sustainability, because you have kept going and you've extended beyond Nairobi. So that'd be really, whereas our government stopped funding the England programme after 15 years and the global one with the pilots that we've done, but the Kenya project continued. A lot of the champions, however, have continued to do amazing work, either in their communities or their countries or on global platforms now, who started their sort of mental health advocacy journey training as anti-stigma champions. So, there is quite a lot left, and quite a lot of our work went into the WHO Stigma Toolkit. So while there's not a national campaign any longer in England, we did secure quite a lot of change, and that hasn't all slipped back. Mental health is a topic of conversation. It is something that workplaces focus on. There's obviously a lot more work to do and a lot more employers to work with. Mental health is in the school curriculum. However, attitudes are slipping back in England, but I won't get political, but there are a multitude of things and factors going on that are influencing attitudes towards people with mental health problems. So there's a call to think about stigma again, and to possibly do some joined up work. But yes, I mean, you know, it's the work of a generation, and beyond, you know, that you can't address attitudes to, you know, around racism or other isms in 10 or 15 years. It's an ongoing.
Exactly.
I'm going to ask Rosemary to talk about Kate.
Of course, just in case you feel lonely, I've changed my name to Sue. I don't know whether you've noticed.
We can always use more Sues.
I just don't want you to feel lonely at this point. It would be very bad. Rosemary, do come in briefly, if you will.
Yeah, I think so you basically covered it. I feel that the training that the champions got, I think a lot of people do want to talk about mental health and to tackle stigma, but they don't have the tools to do it. So the training the champions got, a lot of them have started their own initiatives that are not dependent on Basic Needs. So I wouldn't take credit for the ongoing work. A lot of champions have started their own individual initiatives, but even at Basic Needs, we've incorporated it in other, when we write project proposals for other mental health work, we make sure to remember stigma has to have a distinct focus. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we are now pretty much at the end of our session. I just wanted to quickly draw it together. First of all, a very warm thank you to you, Sue, and to you, Rosemary, and to you, Ertla, for the questions that you posed and the way in which you put this together. Really, all of us as co-chairs at the Mental Health Collaboration much appreciate the work that you've done, Ertla. And Susan, somewhere you are hidden, but you are our coordinator at the Mental Health Collaboration. Let's have a look and see where you are. There you are. So thank you very much indeed for your help in getting all of this organized. Very much appreciated. We wouldn't be able to do this without that support. So that's much appreciated. I was very struck by the films that we saw a little earlier. Some of them were amazing, I thought, and very, very helpful in that they were so simple. You know, they came straight to the point in a way which was, I think, very manageable and understandable. And obviously, they were orientated towards an English or British culture, but you can see how that particular kind of cultural orientation could occur in any particular country. And that would be absolutely fine. Yeah, it was lovely to see the Gede Foundation, a wonderful organization, given the credit there. And I remember wrote in Ertla in the early days of social franchising with Basic Needs, they became a partner. So that was wonderful in that respect. It was very good to hear about some of the way in which both Rosemary and Sue came into this work, and the way in which they decided, each individually in their own journeys and path, to actually jump into the whole question of mental health, global mental health, and why they did it, and what particularly struck them in the context of stigma and exclusion and how to fight it, which they have been working on so much. And as you mentioned, Claire, we mustn't forget the success. That's the whole point. And we have had a lot of successes shared with us today. Some of the links have come onto the chat. I have put my own email in there. Sue has put her email in there. We've had some wonderful comments from individuals. Thank you very much, Jacob, for your comments, and also for you, Maria. Thank you very much indeed. And Lana, very sweet of you to put your comment in, and so on. We much appreciate your support of us, Lana, as well. Eleni, thank you for being with us also. It just remains now for me to thank all of you for having been with us today. And we look forward to seeing you at the Mental Health Collaboration for Catalyst now very soon.